Everybody in the voting section heard her say this. Mr. Coates heard her say it. If he were allowed to comply with the subpoena, he would testify to the exact same thing.
And you heard it as well?
Absolutely. I was shocked. It was lawlessness.
Are there any other similar type instructions that you can tell us about? There's one argument that you mentioned that was raised about resources. And very quickly, I will read you part of what purportedly was what Mr. Coates said at his going-away party and ask if you can confirm that this was his statement. Quote, "Some who criticize the two cases," and that's Ike Brown and the Black Panthers, "about which I speak, claim that they are not opposed to protecting the rights of white voters, but question using the resources of the voting section in that manner. I question the validity of that criticism. Given the number of cases the voting section has filed during the past 40 years on behalf of racial minorities, I do not understand why a mere 2 cases on behalf of white voters would have raised the ire of most of the critics of the Ike Brown and New Black Panther Party cases to the level that has been observed. Those critics are not motivated primarily by resource concerns, but rather, in my opinion, by a strongly held but erroneous view that the work of the Civil Rights Division in its enforcement of the VRA should be limited to protecting racial, ethnic, and language minority voters. The resource issue is a red herring raised by those who want to continue to enforce the Voting Rights Act in a racially biased fashion and to turn a blind eye whenever incidents arise that indicate that minority persons have acted improperly in voting matters." First, did he say something along these lines?
Yes, he did. In front of the whole section and in front of Deputy Assistant Attorney General Julie Fernandez, and he thought that Tom Perez was also going to be there for that message.
What was your reaction to these statements?
What was my reaction?
No, what was the reaction? First, your reaction.
Well, of course, I've lived that for the last 5 years. So
you feel he was accurate?
There's no question about it. I mean, as I said, that's as plain as the fact that we're all sitting in this room. I've lived it. I know that's the truth. And if he were here to testify, he would tell you that's the truth.
Was there any comment that you picked up as far as the rest of the section, what their reaction was?
No, it was very uncomfortable for a lot of people because when you have the courage to call people out for lawlessness, they don't like to hear it.
After the commission began its investigation, were you asked to help produce the evidence and review what had occurred?
I'm not going to answer that question. I'm sorry. That gets into them judging what their extent of their privilege was, which arguably is an internal deliberation on a privilege matter that I'm not going to answer.
Okay, I'm not asking about the substance. I'm just asking, were you part of it?
But deployment of resources is part of it, and I'm just not going to answer that question.
You,
I'm objecting officially for that purpose.
Okay. You have indicated publicly, though, that you met with Mr. Perez before he testified before the commission. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Tell us about that, please.
I held out hope. I think Tom Perez is a good man. I really do. We might disagree on how to get certain things done. We might have different views. But I've always sensed that he is a good person. I can't say that for everybody I've met in this. But with Tom Perez, I can. And I held out hope that a good person like I thought he was, and still do, would have changed their mind if only we had an opportunity to warn him that the testimony he might give would be inaccurate. I have not said that he testified falsely. I have not said that he lied. I think that he believes in some measure what he's saying. But Mr. Coates and I and Popper went and met with him the day before he testified here for about an hour, and we laid out all of our arguments and begged him not to testify inaccurately about the case.
Just so it's clear, and I believe you've issued a statement recently in the last day or so, you're just saying that he's inaccurate. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've never accused him of lying. Those are inaccurate news reports. I've accused him of testifying inaccurately because I really believe he's a good man. I really believe that if anybody can clean this mess up who would be acceptable to this administration, he's the guy to do it.
Now, you said Mr. Coates was there as well. Was he brought back specifically to meet with Mr. Perez?
He called in by phone.
Okay. Why'd you resign?
Well, as I said, I believe in one of my articles, I was placed, and as I said in the opening, I was placed in a position where there was a clear federal law on point that required cooperation with the lawful subpoena of this commission, where I was being instructed, I've believed illegally, to dodge the subpoena. Also, the testimony that was given to this commission, I continue to believe was inaccurate by Mr. Perez, and I resigned.
Did you resign as a direct result of his testimony?
If he had not testified the way he did, there is some chance I would not have resigned.
There are press reports, basically leaks about you, saying that you're, quote, disgruntled, to you're a conservative activist. Can you address those?
Well, I was just promoted 2 weeks before I resigned, so I'm certainly not disgruntled. Let me take up the second point. My personal views about things never had anything to do with what I did at the voting section. You mentioned being conservative. I think that's pretty simplistic and juvenile for people to say that. For example, did the fact that I wanted my taxes lowered have anything to do with what I did in the voting section? Of course not. Did the fact that I agree with the Supreme Court in Lawrence v. Texas when it struck down restrictions on sodomy laws, when it allowed gay people to live in freedom, the fact that I agreed with that, did that affect my work? Never. But there is one personal belief that affected my work, and that was my deep and abiding respect of the 14th and 15th Amendments. There's no amendments to the Constitution that were gotten with such cost. I mean, think about this. 2% of the American population died to get those amendments to ensure racial equality. That would be the same as Cleveland, Indianapolis, and Denver today just vanishing in some struggle. So we got racial equality enshrined as a constitutional principle at such enormous cost in this country. And so it affected me profoundly. That was a personal belief that every single day when I came to work meant a great deal to me. And so all those other things didn't, but this one did.
Now, one of the things that we were told, by that I mean the Commission, as far back as September 2009, that the Department couldn't cooperate in our investigation because the matter was being investigated by the Department's Office of Professional Responsibility.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm going to object to that. Any questions in reference to the Office of Professional Responsibility?
My
ongoing investigation.
My only question is, were you ever interviewed?
I'm not going to answer that.
I believe there was a press report where you indicated that you were only interviewed a week before you resigned.
I never said anything like that.
Okay. One of the matters that has been raised in the press about the Commission, about this investigation, is that other cases were not pursued, and specifically a matter involving, in 2006, an incident in Pima, Arizona. Were you ever involved in a case involving an incident in Pima, Arizona with regard to armed individuals challenging challenging voters?
I had no involvement with that.
I have no further questions.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, we will have questions from each of the commissioners. As I said earlier, we will have 2 rounds. Each commissioner will have 5 minutes. Ordinarily, I would start off the questioning, but I am going to swap positions with Commissioner Gaziano. So, Commissioner Gaziano?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much.
Now, before you start, okay, I just want to make sure that we had someone on the clock. I will I'll add some time for my interruption.
Thank you very much also, Mr. Adams, and if another round permits, I'd like to explain further just how grateful I am that you're trying to thread this very difficult needle that you have between maybe Scylla and Charybdis, your legal obligation to come forward and comply with our subpoena, and what I think are the bogus but still threatening claims that the department may have if you stray. And I'd like to explain that for the public, and again why I think that's still very courageous that you're able to do so. But I need to drill down on some of these matters you've already set forth.